I'm going to speak about this in 3 different ways. The first way is how do guitarists remember songs that they write? The second way is how do guitarists remember songs when they're chord-based? And the third way is how do guitarists remember songs when they are riff-based? So the second two apply to if you was learning a song by somebody else, and the first one applies to how guitarists remember songs that they physically write themselves. So let's get stuck into number 1. How does a guitarist remember a song that they write? This one's the easy one. So it's a lot easier, believe it or not, to write a song and remember it than it is to learn a song and remember it. Because when a guitarist is writing a song, what they are playing, they are literally utilizing techniques that they already know without realizing most of the time. Because how can you utilize a technique that you don't know how to play? When it comes to learning songs, you might go for learning a song that involves techniques that you've not done before. And that's the idea of learning a song. For me, anyway, that's the way I like to learn songs, and the reason that I like to learn other people's songs. It's not to actually learn the song, it's to learn the techniques involved. So when a guitarist writes a song, they're doing techniques that they already know. So how do they remember the song? Dead easy. The simple answer is repetition. So a guitarist comes up with a riff, for instance, and generally when you're writing a song, you like the sound of a certain riff. You keep repeating that riff until you go on autopilot mode, basically. Once you're on autopilot, you naturally just memorize it anyway. And you get the singer there as well, and when you get vocals in there, vocal lines start being a guitarist's guide for when to change to a next part. Now, when a guitarist is memorizing or remembering a song they've wrote themselves, and this applies to all 3 things that I'm going to speak about, the biggest part of how they remember it after, I suppose during the whole repetition thing to work their muscle memory, the biggest part is to think structurally. So maybe give, like, say it's riff based, you might give the riff a name, or you'll think of verse, chorus, verse, chorus. That's where that whole concept comes from. It's a way of remembering which part of a song you're in. So structure, basically, as opposed to playing a riff and thinking like, and I've noticed a lot of guitarists do this, thinking fret numbers, as opposed to thinking fret numbers or certain note names, just play the riff so much that you don't even have to think about what frets that you're playing. It'll get ingrained into your muscle memory. Okay, so number 2 is how do you remember songs that are wrote by somebody else? How does the guitarist remember that? So, and it's chord based, this one, so I'm going to go chord based first of all. The chord based side of it is look for, again, think sectionally, so think maybe verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, like a general structure, okay? And in the verse, try and find the repeating patterns, okay? So again, a lot of learning guitarists think of something, say a verse went like this: F, C, G, A minor, F, C, G, A minor, okay? So you're thinking of the verse like that. Now, how a lot of guitarists would actually remember that is that there's 2 repeating patterns there of, it's just 4 chords, F, C, G, A minor, and then it repeats again. So if you practice that pattern enough times, just going F, C, G, A minor. And if you relate the F to be in the start of the pattern and the A minor to be in the end of the pattern, as opposed to having to think about the individual chords, you will think about all the chords together. F, C, G, and A minor, all together, not individually. Like you'll think of them as belonging together. So you think of it as a part now, as opposed to individual chords. And then you just say to yourself, times by 2. Then once you're at a point where you can do that F, C, G, A minor on autopilot, times by 2, then start giving that a name. So that chord progression for that song. So you'll think such and such a song that it's called, and you'll think verse. And then you'll say, I'm just going to let's play the verse of such and such a song. And you know that verse goes F, C, G, A minor times by 2. And then the chorus may go G, F, C, D minor. So you would do a similar sort of thing there. You'd repeat those chords where you can go on autopilot, and it may do that twice. And then once you're doing that, you think G, F, C, A minor times by 2, and you give it a name. So chorus. Okay? Now what if you get, like, for instance, a chorus that has a very similar progression but doesn't have a repeating pattern? So you might have one that goes G, F, C, D minor, G, F, C, F. Well, in that case, the way I would think of that is I would think that there actually is a repeating pattern there. So the progression does repeat twice, just the end chord changes. So I would think as G, F, C, D minor, and then I would think times 2, but the D minor changes to an F on the second repeat. What I would then do is repeat that. So rinse and repeat it loads so you can go on autopilot. And whilst you're repeating that, think of the start and end point. So you're thinking of G as the start point, and you're thinking of D minor as the end point. And then on the next repeat, you're thinking the same thing, but you're thinking of F as the end point. Then, and give it a name once you do it. So go chorus. Once you've rinsed it and repeated it enough times, your muscles will just start naturally doing it. Muscle memory again. Now the final part to our guitarist remembers songs. Riff-based. This is for riff-based songs. So how do you remember a riff-based song? Now this is a bit of a strange one, but the same concept does apply whether the song is complex or not. The place where this can get very tricky is if you're doing songs like prog songs where the song is really long and has a lot of changes, but it's still, the concept still applies. The main concept is rinsing and repeating as much as you can. Okay, so if it's riff based, the trick is do not think fret numbers. So don't think to yourself, let's say you have a riff that goes okay, nice simple riff. If you want to get used to remembering that, and let's say that's the verse. Okay, so we'll call that, first of all, we'll give it a name. We'll call it the verse riff, so verse, so that you remember it. And then you just want to repeat that as many times as you can. But try not to think of yourself as playing open, open, 5, 3, 5, 3. Work out which fingers you're going to use to play the riff. Okay, and have little guide points if you really do need fret numbers. So I'm thinking open here, and I'm thinking I use my first finger for that as a power chord. Okay, and then I know it goes to 5, so instead of thinking 5, I'll think what fingers am I going to use on this next part? Well, it makes sense to use these 2 fingers. Okay. And it goes to 5, so the only guide point I'm using is here. But I'm not thinking 5, I'm just thinking of the second dot. on the guitar. That's why inlays are there on the guitar, so that like they're a guide for you knowing. Like you should naturally know that this is fret 3, this is fret 5, this is fret 7, this is fret 6, this is fret 9. Like the dots are there to help you. So I'm using that as a guide and knowing that I slide to my 3rd finger with it. And then I know that on the next part I'm using just these 2 fingers. So I know it goes. This finger naturally lands there. Once I go there, this finger naturally lands above that fret. It would make no sense for me to use this finger because I'm overstretching and it doesn't naturally land above that fret. It lands above this one. Okay, so the trick is think about what fingers you're using when you're playing your riffs and give it a name. So for that we may have verse. Now what if, and this is the final part of it, what if the riff was a little bit more complex and longer? So let's say I'm just going to extend on that. Maybe if we have something like... something like that, okay? How does a guitarist remember a riff like that? So the idea is, in a song, by the way, the idea is to section the riff, and then once you've sectioned the riff and got each part of the riff, then push the riff together and give the riff a name. I would think of this riff in 4 parts. I would play those 4 parts with little pauses in between so that you can think of them as part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 4. Part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. And again, really pay attention to what fingers you're using when you're playing so that you can build the muscle memory. If you're changing fingers every time that you're doing it, you're using your fingers in a different way every time, you really need to dial in utilizing the concept of which finger you use as opposed to which fret you're pressing. So which finger you use, I would prioritize that above and use a guide fret again. Once you can play each part of that riff clean, then I would start slowly pushing it together. Now, if you can't quite push it all together, then we add 4 parts to the riff. Push each part together, so you're pushing part 1 and 2 together, and part 3 and 4 together, so you have a gap between those. And now you can think of that alone as part 1, and that as part 2. Okay? Part 1, part 2. Then once you got used to that, you repeat it as much as you can again, and then you push them 2 parts together. And then you keep repeating that. Then once you can do that, you'll find you'll start going on autopilot. Give it a name. So refer it to the part of the song that it is, whether it's intro or whether it's verse. It might be the riff that happens underneath the verse, or whether it's chorus. Give it a name. And then before you notice it, when you learn a song, you'll actually realise that a lot of the time anyway, a lot of songs don't actually contain loads of riffs. They just contain a few riffs. And you'll be like, well, there's 5 parts in this song, so there's only 5 riffs. So I'm only learning 5 things in theory. And 3 of those parts in the song are a chorus. So I'm actually only learning 3 things because the chorus repeats throughout the song. So the answer to how do guitarists remember songs is dead easy. We remember them by thinking sectionally as opposed to thinking of every single individual thing that's going on. We remember them sectionally, and when we're learning it, we repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. We don't just go, oh, I can play it once, you can play it once, and then move straight on to the next bit. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments section below. If you could subscribe to my channel, that'd be amazing. And if you could like the video as well, that would be awesome. In the meantime, keep on rocking, and I'll catch you next time.